Richard Blackstone III stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, wore Italian suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and carried himself with the unmistakable arrogance of someone who had inherited billions and mistaken luck for merit. At 45, he was the third-generation CEO of Blackstone Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate that his grandfather had built from nothing, and that Richard had slowly been running into the ground through poor decisions, excessive spending, and a management style that prioritized ego over results. Blackstone Industries had once been a powerhouse in American manufacturing, producing everything from automotive components to industrial machinery, with a reputation for quality and innovation that had sustained the company through multiple economic downturns. However, under Richard's leadership, the company had lost market share to more agile competitors, alienated key customers through arrogant pricing policies, and accumulated massive debt to fund Richard's extravagant lifestyle and vanity projects. The company's financial troubles had been carefully hidden from public view through creative accounting and strategic communication, but industry insiders were beginning to whisper about potential bankruptcy or forced acquisition. Richard's board of directors had grown increasingly restless about his performance, and several major investors had quietly begun exploring options for replacing him as CEO. Despite these mounting pressures, Richard maintained his facade of invincible success, driving his Ferrari through the streets of Manhattan, dining at exclusive restaurants, and treating everyone around him with the casual dismissiveness of someone who believed his wealth made him inherently superior to ordinary people. His arrogance had become legendary among New York's business elite, but his family's historical influence and remaining financial resources still commanded a certain grudging respect. Richard's morning routine included a ritual drive through areas of the city where he felt his presence demonstrated his status and success. These drives often took him through working-class neighborhoods, where he could observe people whose lives he considered beneath his concern, reinforcing his sense of superiority and entitlement. It was during one of these self-aggrandizing tours that Richard would encounter someone who would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his life and career. The gas station where Richard stopped that Tuesday morning appeared to be typical of thousands of similar establishments throughout America. A small, independently owned business serving a diverse clientele of commuters, truckers, and local residents who needed fuel, convenience items, and basic automotive services. Maria Santos appeared to be exactly what Richard expected to find, working at a gas station in Queens, a middle-aged Latina woman in a worn uniform, operating the register with the quiet efficiency of someone who had performed the same tasks thousands of times. At 52, Maria moved with the careful economy of motion that came from years of physical work, and her interactions with customers demonstrated the patient professionalism of someone who understood that her livelihood depended on treating everyone with respect regardless of their background or behavior. What Richard couldn't see beneath Maria's humble exterior was one of the most brilliant business minds of her generation, hidden behind decades of careful anonymity and strategic invisibility. Maria Santos was not actually a gas station clerk. She was Maria Elena Santos-Rodriguez, founder and controlling shareholder of Rodriguez Holdings, a private investment company that had quietly accumulated assets worth over $50 billion through strategic acquisitions, real estate development, and technology investments. Maria had built her fortune from nothing, starting with a small bodega that she had purchased with savings from her job as a factory worker in the 1990s. Her natural business instincts, combined with an almost supernatural ability to identify undervalued assets and emerging market trends, had allowed her to expand from retail into real estate, then into private equity and venture capital investments that had generated extraordinary returns over 3 decades. However, Maria's success had come at a personal cost that had shaped her approach to wealth and power. Early in her career, she had learned that being a successful Latina businesswoman made her a target for discrimination, exploitation, and violence that threatened both her safety and her business interests. In response, she had developed an elaborate system of shell companies, anonymous investments, and carefully constructed personas that allowed her to operate at the highest levels of finance while maintaining the appearance of being an ordinary working-class woman. Maria's decision to occasionally work at the gas station that she owned was part of her strategy for staying connected to the experiences of ordinary people and monitoring the economic conditions that affected her investments. The work also provided her with a form of meditation and stress relief that contrasted sharply with the high-pressure world of billion-dollar transactions and corporate acquisitions. More importantly, working anonymously allowed Maria to observe how people behaved when they believed they were interacting with someone who had no power or influence. These observations had taught her valuable lessons about character, integrity, and the corrupting effects of wealth and privilege that informed her business decisions and philanthropic activities. Richard's Ferrari pulled into the gas station with the theatrical roar that he believed announced his importance to anyone within hearing distance. His approach to the pump was deliberately ostentatious, designed to draw attention and demonstrate his superior status to the working-class customers who populated such establishments. Richard enjoyed these moments of contrast between his obvious wealth and the humble circumstances of people he considered his social inferiors. The self-service pump failed to function properly, forcing Richard to enter the station's small convenience store to prepay for his gas, a procedure that he found beneath his dignity and that irritated him sufficiently to put him in an aggressive mood. His entrance into the store was marked by loud complaints about the inconvenience and deliberate rudeness toward other customers, who he felt should defer to his obvious superiority. Maria observed Richard's behavior from behind the counter, with the calm assessment of someone who had encountered countless examples of entitled behavior during her decades in business. She recognized the type immediately: inherited wealth combined with minimal achievement, insecurity masked by aggression, and the assumption that money provided license for treating others badly. Maria had dealt with similar personalities throughout her career, usually when acquiring their failing companies or replacing them as executives. When Richard reached the counter, his interaction with Maria was deliberately insulting and condescending. He spoke slowly and loudly, as if addressing someone with limited intelligence, made disparaging comments about her appearance and presumed background, and generally behaved as if her humanity was irrelevant to his convenience. His attitude reflected not just personal arrogance, but a broader worldview that divided humanity into those who mattered and those who existed solely to serve his needs. Maria's response to Richard's behavior was professionally neutral, but internally calculating. She processed his credit card transaction while simultaneously running a mental analysis of his vehicle, clothing, behavior patterns, and casual comments that revealed details about his business and personal circumstances. Her years of experience in evaluating investment targets and business adversaries allowed her to construct a detailed profile of Richard's likely weaknesses and vulnerabilities within minutes of meeting him. The interaction concluded with Richard's departing insult about Maria's intelligence and prospects, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who enjoyed demonstrating his perceived power over vulnerable people. As his Ferrari roared away from the gas station, Richard felt the satisfaction that came from reinforcing his sense of superiority, completely unaware that he had just provided his future destroyer with both motivation and tactical intelligence. Maria's encounter with Richard Blackstone had been brief, but her decades of business experience had taught her to pay attention when someone revealed their character so completely. Richard's behavior had demonstrated not just personal arrogance, but the kind of fundamental disrespect for working people that suggested deeper problems with judgment, empathy, and leadership, qualities that inevitably manifested in business decisions and corporate culture. That evening, Maria initiated the kind of comprehensive investigation that had become routine whenever she encountered potential acquisition targets or competitors. Using resources that ranged from professional intelligence services to public record searches, Maria began assembling a complete picture of Richard's business empire, personal finances, and strategic vulnerabilities that would inform her next moves. The investigation revealed that Blackstone Industries was in far worse condition than public information suggested. The company's financial statements, when analyzed by Maria's team of forensic accountants, showed patterns of declining revenue, increasing debt, and operational inefficiencies that indicated fundamental problems with leadership and strategy. Richard's personal spending had accelerated these problems, with company resources being diverted to fund his lifestyle and vanity projects. More significantly, Maria's analysis revealed that Blackstone Industries controlled several assets that would be valuable additions to her portfolio, including manufacturing facilities, patent portfolios, and real estate holdings that Richard had systematically undervalued and mismanaged. The company's problems were primarily leadership-related rather than fundamental, meaning that competent management could potentially restore profitability and growth. Maria's investigation also uncovered information about Richard's personal character that reinforced her negative impression from their gas station encounter. Former employees, business partners, and industry colleagues described patterns of behavior that included discrimination, harassment, and the kind of ethical violations that created legal and reputational risks for any organization under his control. The combination of Richard's poor character, his company's financial weakness, and the strategic value of Blackstone Industries' assets created an opportunity that aligned perfectly with Maria's investment criteria. She had built her fortune by acquiring undervalued companies from incompetent managers, improving their operations, and generating returns through better leadership and strategic vision. However, Maria's motivation for targeting Blackstone Industries went beyond simple financial opportunity. Richard's treatment of her at the gas station had been symptomatic of broader attitudes toward working people that Maria found personally offensive and socially destructive. Acquiring his company would provide both financial returns and social justice, demonstrating that actions have consequences, even for those who believe their wealth makes them untouchable. Maria's approach to acquiring Blackstone Industries reflected the sophisticated financial strategies that had built her fortune over 3 decades. Rather than launching a direct hostile takeover that would alert Richard to the threat and potentially trigger defensive measures, Maria constructed a complex acquisition plan that would gradually accumulate control while maintaining strategic invisibility until the decisive moment. The strategy began with Maria's team identifying and purchasing Blackstone Industries' debt from various financial institutions that had grown nervous about the company's declining performance. These debt purchases were conducted through multiple shell companies and intermediaries, ensuring that no single entity appeared to be accumulating a dangerous concentration of leverage over Richard's company. Simultaneously, Maria began acquiring Blackstone Industries stock through dozens of different investment vehicles, staying below the disclosure thresholds that would require public notification of her growing ownership stake. Her decades of experience in financial markets had taught her how to navigate regulatory requirements while maintaining the element of surprise that was crucial to successful acquisitions. Maria also initiated strategic relationships with Blackstone Industries' key suppliers, customers, and creditors, positioning herself to influence the company's operations and financial stability without Richard's knowledge. These relationships were developed through her existing business network and were presented as routine commercial opportunities rather than coordinated acquisition activities. The most sophisticated element of Maria's strategy involved recruiting several of Blackstone Industries' most talented employees and board members, offering them superior opportunities within her existing companies, while also gaining inside intelligence about Richard's strategic plans and operational weaknesses. These recruitment efforts were conducted discreetly, ensuring that Richard remained unaware of the talent drain that was weakening his organization. Throughout this process, Maria maintained her anonymous profile, ensuring that none of her acquisition activities could be traced back to the gas station clerk that Richard had insulted. Her team of lawyers, accountants, and business managers executed her instructions without fully understanding the personal motivations behind the complex acquisition strategy. Maria's timeline for the acquisition was deliberately patient, reflecting her understanding that sustainable business success required careful planning and strategic execution rather than impulsive action. However, Richard's continued poor performance and increasingly desperate financial situation were accelerating the timeline and creating opportunities for more aggressive tactics. The psychological satisfaction of orchestrating Richard's downfall from a position of assumed invisibility added an element of personal enjoyment to what would otherwise have been a routine business acquisition, though Maria never allowed emotional considerations to override sound financial judgment. As Maria's acquisition strategy progressed through the summer and fall, Blackstone Industries began experiencing the kind of systematic financial pressure that preceded corporate collapse. The coordinated actions of Maria's various shell companies and business partners created a perfect storm of challenges that tested every weakness in Richard's leadership and strategic planning. The debt purchases that Maria had orchestrated suddenly became relevant when several major creditors simultaneously demanded accelerated payment schedules and increased collateral requirements. Richard found himself scrambling to meet obligations that had previously been manageable, forcing him to liquidate assets and negotiate emergency financing that further weakened his company's financial position. Stock price manipulation, while illegal when conducted overtly, could be achieved legally through strategic timing of transactions, selective disclosure of negative information, and coordinated selling pressure that created downward momentum in Blackstone Industries' share price. Maria's network of investment professionals executed these tactics with the precision that came from decades of experience in financial markets. Customer relationships that Richard had taken for granted began deteriorating as Maria's allies in various industries shared concerns about Blackstone Industries' financial stability and encouraged alternative sourcing strategies. The loss of major contracts created cash flow problems that cascaded through Richard's operations and forced additional cost-cutting measures that degraded product quality and employee morale. Supplier relationships faced similar pressure as Maria's network questioned payment terms, demanded prepayment for materials, and generally created operational friction that increased Blackstone Industries' costs while reducing efficiency. These tactics were subtle enough to appear as normal business caution rather than coordinated economic warfare. Richard's response to these mounting pressures revealed the leadership weaknesses that Maria had identified during their brief gas station encounter. Instead of acknowledging problems and developing strategic solutions, Richard blamed external factors, attacked his critics, and made increasingly desperate decisions that accelerated his company's decline. The psychological stress of fighting multiple crises simultaneously began affecting Richard's judgment and behavior, leading to public outbursts, irrational strategic decisions, and the kind of erratic leadership that prompted key employees and board members to question his fitness for continued leadership. Maria observed these developments with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic predictions were being validated by real-world results. By winter, Blackstone Industries was approaching the kind of financial crisis that would force Richard to consider options that had previously been unthinkable, including potential acquisition by competitors or private equity firms that could provide the capital and leadership necessary for corporate survival. Maria's culminating strategy for acquiring Blackstone Industries involved creating a situation where Richard would be forced to accept an acquisition offer that appeared to be his salvation, but was actually the final step in his complete defeat. The approach required precise timing and psychological manipulation that leveraged Richard's desperation while maintaining the illusion that he retained some control over his fate. The setup began when Maria arranged for one of her subsidiary companies to approach Richard with what appeared to be a lucrative joint venture opportunity that would provide immediate cash flow relief and access to new markets. The proposal was structured to seem like Richard's salvation, offering terms generous enough to overcome his natural suspicion while requiring operational integration that would give Maria's people access to Blackstone Industries' most valuable assets and strategic information. Richard's acceptance of the joint venture provided Maria with the legal and operational foothold necessary to execute the final phase of her acquisition strategy. Her people embedded within Blackstone Industries began documenting the full extent of the company's financial problems, operational inefficiencies, and legal vulnerabilities that would justify emergency measures to protect the joint venture's interests. The documentation process revealed that Richard's mismanagement had created situations that bordered on fraud, including financial reporting irregularities, environmental violations, and employment law violations that exposed the company to massive legal liability. Maria's lawyers began preparing the legal framework that would allow her to seize control of Blackstone Industries through emergency provisions in the joint venture agreement. Meanwhile, Maria's financial pressure campaign reached its climax when several major creditors simultaneously called their loans. Suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding balances, and key customers canceled contracts citing concerns about the company's stability. The coordinated timing of these actions created a liquidity crisis that threatened immediate bankruptcy unless Richard could secure emergency financing. The emergency financing that appeared at the crucial moment came from Maria's network, but was structured as a standard distressed debt transaction that appeared to be routine crisis management rather than coordinated acquisition activity. The terms included security interests in substantially all of Blackstone Industries' assets and operational control provisions that effectively transferred management authority to Maria's representatives. Richard's desperation and weakened negotiating position led him to accept terms that he would never have considered under normal circumstances, including personal guarantees and collateral requirements that exposed his private wealth to potential seizure. Maria's lawyers had structured the transaction to ensure that Richard would lose everything if he failed to meet the agreement's increasingly demanding terms. The final trap was set when Maria's representatives informed Richard that the only way to satisfy the emergency financing terms was to accept a complete acquisition by the lending consortium, with Richard receiving a minimal payout and no future role in the company's management. The moment when Maria revealed her true identity to Richard was carefully orchestrated to maximize both the practical and psychological impact of his defeat. The setting was the boardroom of Blackstone Industries, where Richard had been summoned for what he believed would be negotiations about restructuring the emergency financing that had temporarily saved his company from immediate bankruptcy. Richard entered the meeting expecting to face a consortium of anonymous creditors and their legal representatives, prepared to negotiate from a position of weakness, but still maintaining some hope of retaining partial control over the company his grandfather had built. Instead, he found himself confronting the gas station clerk he had insulted months earlier, now revealed as the architect of his systematic destruction. Maria's transformation from humble service worker to boardroom predator was complete and devastating. Dressed in an elegant business suit that reflected her true status, surrounded by an army of lawyers and financial advisors, and speaking with the authority that came from controlling billions in assets, Maria presented a figure of power that completely overturned Richard's assumptions about social hierarchy and personal worth. The legal documents that Maria's team presented to Richard detailed the complete acquisition of Blackstone Industries, including all assets, operations, and intellectual property that would be transferred to Maria's control for a fraction of their actual value. The terms had been structured to comply with all regulatory requirements, while ensuring that Richard would receive minimal compensation for surrendering his family's business empire. More crushing than the financial terms was the revelation of how completely Maria had outmaneuvered Richard throughout their entire conflict. Her presentation included detailed documentation of every strategic move, every financial manipulation, and every legal trap that had led to his defeat, demonstrating a level of planning and execution that revealed the vast gap between their respective business capabilities. Richard's realization that he had been systematically destroyed by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant created a psychological crisis that went beyond simple business failure. His worldview, based on assumptions about class, race, and gender that had shaped his entire approach to life, was revealed as not just morally wrong, but tactically catastrophic. The meeting concluded with Maria's explanation of how Richard's behavior at the gas station had motivated her to target his company, transforming a casual insult into a billion-dollar business transaction that would serve as a permanent example of the consequences of treating people with disrespect. Richard's arrogance had literally cost him everything he had inherited and believed he deserved. Maria's final message to Richard was delivered with the same professional courtesy that she had shown during their gas station encounter, but now backed by the absolute power that came from controlling his fate and future. The acquisition of Blackstone Industries by Maria's consortium sent shockwaves through New York's business community, as industry insiders struggled to understand how one of the city's most prominent families had been systematically outmaneuvered by an unknown adversary. The speed and completeness of Richard's defeat challenged assumptions about corporate power and demonstrated that even established businesses were vulnerable to sufficiently determined and sophisticated attacks. Maria's decision to reveal her true identity as Rodriguez Holdings's founder created additional layers of surprise and admiration throughout the financial world. Her 3-decade campaign of anonymous wealth building was recognized as one of the most successful examples of strategic invisibility in modern business history, and her acquisition of Blackstone Industries was analyzed as a masterpiece of corporate warfare and psychological manipulation. The business press coverage of Maria's emergence focused heavily on the dramatic contrast between her humble appearance and her extraordinary achievements, creating a narrative that resonated with audiences who appreciated stories about merit triumphing over privilege. Her strategic use of assumed identity and social invisibility was praised as brilliant tactics that had allowed her to operate without the constraints and targeting that typically affected high-profile investors. Richard's fall from corporate leadership to unemployed former executive created a cautionary tale that was widely discussed in business schools and professional development programs. His treatment of Maria at the gas station became a legendary example of how personal character flaws could create business vulnerabilities, and how assumptions about social status could blind leaders to threats from unexpected sources. The operational changes that Maria implemented at the renamed Santos Industries demonstrated the extent to which Richard's leadership had damaged the company's performance and potential. Within months of the acquisition, improved management practices, strategic investments, and cultural reforms had restored profitability and begun attracting the kind of talent and customers that had abandoned the company during Richard's tenure. Maria's decision to promote several former Blackstone Industries employees to senior leadership positions sent a clear message about merit-based advancement while also providing continuity that smoothed the transition to new ownership. Her management style, emphasizing respect for all employees regardless of their background or position, created a dramatic contrast with Richard's approach and contributed to improved morale and performance. The philanthropic initiatives that Maria launched using Santos Industries' restored profitability included scholarships for working-class students, small business development programs, and community investment projects that reflected her commitment to using wealth for social benefit rather than personal aggrandizement. The ultimate resolution of Maria's conflict with Richard extended far beyond simple business acquisition into a broader demonstration of how justice could be achieved through strategic patience and superior capability. Richard's punishment was not just financial but educational, forcing him to confront the consequences of a lifetime of treating people badly and taking success for granted. Richard's attempts to rebuild his career were hampered by his reputation for arrogance and poor judgment, as well as by the non-compete agreements and legal restrictions that Maria had embedded in the acquisition terms. His fall from billionaire CEO to middle management positions at lesser companies provided a harsh education in humility and the realities faced by people he had previously dismissed as unimportant. The psychological impact of being defeated so completely by someone he had underestimated proved to be more devastating to Richard than the financial losses. His worldview had been built on assumptions about superiority and entitlement that Maria's victory had revealed as dangerous delusions, forcing him to confront fundamental questions about identity, worth, and the nature of true achievement. Maria's success story inspired countless other entrepreneurs and business leaders who had faced discrimination or dismissal based on their background, gender, or social position. Her example demonstrated that strategic thinking, patient execution, and superior capability could overcome even the most entrenched advantages of wealth and social position. The Santos Industries acquisition became a case study in business schools and professional development programs, teaching students about the importance of treating all people with respect and the dangers of making assumptions based on appearance or social status. Maria's strategic use of invisibility and misdirection was analyzed as a brilliant example of information asymmetry and psychological warfare in business competition. Maria's continued success in building Rodriguez Holdings into one of America's largest private investment companies validated her approach to business and confirmed that her victory over Richard had been the result of superior ability rather than temporary luck. Her philanthropic activities and commitment to promoting economic opportunity for working-class communities demonstrated that wealth could be used to create positive social change. The gas station where Maria and Richard had first encountered each other became a symbol of how small moments could have enormous consequences, and how treating people with dignity and respect was not just morally right, but strategically wise. Maria continued to occasionally work there, maintaining her connection to the experiences of ordinary people while managing a business empire worth tens of billions of dollars. Richard's eventual acceptance of his new circumstances and his gradual development of humility and empathy represented a form of redemption that had been impossible during his years of inherited privilege. His experience served as proof that even the most arrogant people could learn and grow when forced to confront the consequences of their actions and the realities of life without unearned advantages.